Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating story. We're going to look at how a highly privileged aristocrat actually became the architect of modern India. We are, of course, talking about Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, that's a name absolutely synonymous with the foundation of the world's largest democracy. But the path he took to get there, well, it's full of surprising turns and just an incredible amount of personal evolution. It really makes you wonder, right? How on earth does an elite, British-educated lawyer end up transforming into the vanguard of India's revolution? Honestly, it's one of the most fascinating contradictions of the entire 20th century. We're talking about a man who would eventually spend over 16 years as India's very first prime minister, literally steering the country through its infancy as an independent republic. But to really grasp his impact, we have to rewind and look at his incredibly sheltered origins. Section 1. The Privileged Youth. So Jawaharlal Nehru was born in 1889 in Allahabad, and he actually described his own childhood as sheltered and uneventful. He grew up in an atmosphere of just immense privilege, living in the sprawling family mansion known as Anand Bhavan. He was deeply immersed in upper-class British culture from day one. He didn't even go to a traditional school at first. He was educated right at home by private governesses and tutors. Then he's sent off to England to attend Harrow, which is a super prestigious school, where he actually picked up the nickname Joe. From there, he graduated with an honors degree in natural science from Trinity College, Cambridge in 1910, before moving over to London to study law at the Inner Temple. So as you can see, he was completely enveloped in the elite British educational system. But here's the wild part. It was actually within that strict British system that his nationalist fires were first stoked. While he was at Harrow, he received books on the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi as academic prizes. Nehru later captured how much this impacted him, writing, "Visions of similar deeds in India came before, of my gallant fight for Indian freedom, and in my mind, India and Italy got strangely mixed together." He saw Garibaldi as his ultimate revolutionary hero, and reading those stories planted the very first seeds in his mind of fighting for an independent nation. Section 2. A Reluctant Lawyer. Fast forward to August 1912. Nehru returns to India as a barrister and enrolls at the Allahabad High Court. And the expectations resting on his shoulders? Absolutely massive. To put that into perspective, just consider his father Motilaw's income. It was a staggering 10,000 rupees, or about 850 British pounds, every single month. Back then, that was an astronomical amount of money. Motilal Nehru was one of the wealthiest, most prominent barristers in all of British India. So Nehru was stepping right back into a life of virtually unmatched wealth and comfort. He was fully expected to just take the reins, inherit this incredibly lucrative family practice, and maintain that high society lifestyle. But there was just one major problem. He was totally uninspired by it. He relished neither the practice of law nor the company of lawyers. He was frankly bored out of his mind. And that sheer boredom with the legal profession created a sort of vacuum in his life. Ultimately, that vacuum served as the perfect catalyst for him to start drifting away from the courtroom and heavily toward nationalist politics. Section 3. The Radical Shift. The real turning point, though, came with a totally catalytic meeting in 1916. During the Lucknow session of the Congress, Nehru met Mahatma Gandhi for the very first time. And the timeline of how fast things escalated from there is just wild. He returns to India in 1912 as this elite lawyer. 4 years later, he meets Gandhi. Now, his wealthy father initially tried to talk him out of getting drawn into Gandhi's satyagraha, the nonviolent resistance politics, but the political climate in India was heating up fast. Following government repression in 1919, both he and his father actually fully embraced Gandhi's methods. By 1921, this former aristocratic lawyer is arrested for the very first time on charges of anti-governmental activities. And by 1923, he emerges as a major national figure, elected as the General Secretary of the Congress. The transformation was in full swing. It's super fascinating to observe the ideological leap Nehru took here. On one hand, you had the moderates, and his father, Motilal, had long been an important leader of this faction. They believed in seeking reform through cooperation with British authorities. But on the other hand, Nehru's sympathies shifted hard toward the radical approach. He championed Swaraj, meaning self-governance. This radicalization was heavily fueled by a trip he took to Europe in 1926, which included a visit to the Soviet Union. Now, while he definitely didn't agree with all of their tactics, he became deeply influenced by Marxist economics. He adapted those ideas to the Indian context, which completely cemented his belief that a total, uncompromising break from imperialism was necessary.
Section 4. Demanding complete independence.
We're now moving into the real climax of his political rise in the late 1920s. Nehru was no longer just a participant, he was the driving force, actively pushing the Congress Party, and honestly, even Gandhi himself, into much more extreme, uncompromising territory. The crucial concept here became Purna Swaraj. At a time when older politicians, and even Gandhi initially, were willing to accept dominion status, which basically meant keeping India under the umbrella of the British Empire, Nehru firmly objected. He formed a pressure group within the Congress demanding immediate action and an explicit, complete break from all ties with the British Empire. No half measures.
And his relentless pressure actually worked. Assuming the presidency of the Congress Party at the Lahore session in December 1929, Nehru personally drafted the Indian Declaration of Independence. In it, he makes a definitive, bold claim. We believe, therefore, that India must sever the British connection and attain Purna Swaraj, or complete independence. He argued that the British government had ruined India economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. For Nehru, there was absolutely no going back.
Which brings us to a literally cinematic moment in history. Picture this. At the stroke of midnight, on New Year's Eve, 1929, Nehru stands upon the banks of the Ravi River in Lahore and hoists the tricolor flag of India. As the Pledge of Independence was read out loud, the massive public gathering was asked to raise their hands in approval of withholding taxes from the British. It was just this massive, undeniable public declaration of defiance.
Section 5. The Salt March. Following that midnight declaration, plans for mass civil disobedience were immediately put into motion. This leads us directly into the mass movement phase of his transformation, starting with the incredibly famous 1930s Salt March. Initially, Nehru and some of the other leaders were actually a bit ambivalent about Gandhi's plan to target the British salt tax. It seemed a bit niche. But once the protest began, they realized the sheer, unbridled power of salt as a symbol for everyone. Nehru beautifully captured the explosive, unprecedented response of the village masses, stating, "It seemed as though a spring had been suddenly released." He saw firsthand how it gave the rural masses self-respect and self-reliance, dragging them out of the mire and uniting them all in non-cooperation. And Nehru didn't just direct this from afar, he was right in the thick of it. Getting his hands dirty fully cemented his physical break from his aristocratic past. First, he addressed a massive public meeting and led a vast procession. Then, he literally manufactured contraband salt himself, completely defying the law. And finally, on April 14, 1930, while he was on a train to Raipur, he was arrested for breaching the salt law. He faced trial and received a 6-month sentence in central jail. But get this, that initial 6-month sentence was just a fraction of the price he'd ultimately pay. Across 8 separate periods of detention between 1921 and 1945, Jawaharlal Nehru spent over 9 years of his life locked inside a prison cell. 9 years. That is a staggering physical and mental toll for anyone, let alone a guy who was raised in a sprawling mansion and educated at Cambridge. Which leaves us with this final, really profound question to chew on. How did abandoning a life of immense, sheltered privilege for 9 years of brutal imprisonment shape the man who would eventually guide the world's largest democracy? It was exactly this forge of sacrifice and radical defiance that prepared him to serve over 16 years as India's first prime minister, navigating the incredibly complex early days of the Republic. It's a true testament to how profoundly a person can reinvent themselves for a cause they believe in, heart and soul. Definitely keep this incredible journey in mind the next time you hear the name Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.